Stanley Military Cemetery is a cemetery located near St. Stephen's Beach in Stanley, Hong Kong. Along with the larger Hong Kong Cemetery, it is one of two military cemeteries of the early colonial era, used for the burials of the members of the garrison and the families between 1841 and 1866. There were no further burials here until World War II. The cemetery is roughly triangular in shape and stands on ground rising sharply from the roadside. It is approached by a flight of steps leading up to the Cross of Sacrifice with steep grassy slopes on either side. The cemetery and Hong Kong defense. On the 8th of December 1941, Japan launched an invasion of Hong Kong, which resulted in the British surrendering on Christmas Day of that year. Stanley Village was one of the last battlefields of the defense. The Royal Rifles of Canada, many elements of the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, and sections from the Middlesex were stationed there. Fighting occurred in the cemetery itself on the afternoon of Christmas Day, when D Company Royal Rifles of Canada tried to force the advancing Japanese from Bungalow C. At the British surrender, the majority of the Western civilians in Hong Kong were confined at Stanley Internment Camp, which included the grounds of St. Stephen's College and the warders' accommodation of the prison, while the military personnel were sent to either North Point Camp, Chum Shui Po Pao Camp, Ma Tau Chung Camp and Argyle Street Camp. Due to the lack of food and medical drugs in the camp, many people died at Stanley and were buried here at the time. Those raw graves are still preserved in their original shape. Following the Japanese surrender, many other wartime fatalities from this part of Hong Kong were also reinterred in the cemetery. Burials in the 20th century. There are 598 World War II burials in the cemetery. Of these burials, 175 of them are unidentified and 96 are civilian internees. Eric Morton, a Methodist missionary who died of wounds sustained while driving an ambulance in Wan Chai during the fighting at the Royal Naval Hospital on 26 December 1941, is also buried in the cemetery. War dead from the period 19 to 26 December 1941 of the defense were buried at plots 5 to 6 in the cemetery. Among them were a few Canadians who were sent to Hong Kong 3 weeks prior to the invasion. Another notable group of personnel that were buried or commemorated there are those served in the British Army Aid Group, which helped powers in Hong Kong or other Japanese-occupied zones to escape to China and arranged military needs for resistance in those zones. Among them was Captain M.A. Ansari, who was originally in the 7th Rajput Regiment but from Ma Tau Chung Pao Camp coordinated with the British Army Aid Group after the surrender. He was also a posthumous recipient of the George Cross. Also Colonel Lance Newnem of the Middlesex Regiment, John Alexander Fraser of the British Army Aid Group, Captain Douglas Ford of the Royal Scots and Flight Lieutenant Hector Gray of Royal Air Force were also a posthumous recipient of the George Cross. For the same reason too, there are some burials after the war arranged at Spot 8. On the other hand, there are 3 commemorations of casualties of the First World War, buried elsewhere in the territory and whose graves are now lost. The larger group of World War II military burials is at Sai Wan War Cemetery in Chai Wan Gallery.